Is the Viltrox 33mm f1.4 better than its Fuji equivalent? Do that again. Hiya folks, so I bought this lens because I wanted to have an alternative portrait lens, and I wanted something that was a little bit faster than the XC 35mm f2.0 that I currently have. Now that's, I've done a review of that and I'll link it below in the description so you can have a little comparison and see what that one's like. And certainly if you're on a budget, the 35mm Fuji is a compelling option. So as well as the XC 35mm, Fuji also do an XF 35mm f2, which is weather resistant as well. It's a great lens, but it costs a little bit more than the Viltrox 33mm, coming in around at £480, whereas the Viltrox 33mm is only £260. So a much cheaper lens. Before I get into a sort of a detailed discussion about the actual lens and what I think of it, I wanted to show you some of the tests I've done. So first up, I'm going to show you the tracking autofocus test as I walk backwards and forwards in front of the camera. And as you can see, its tracking is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's quite as good as the 23mm that I tested a few weeks ago, but it's certainly up there. It's probably not a great test for this lens because it's not necessarily the kind of thing you would do. This lens is very much what I'm using it for now, which is from a video perspective, from pieces to camera, and equally for portraits. And as I say, I'm going to link some portrait examples. Rather than put too many examples, I will put a few, but put too many examples in the video so you can get the full idea of what the quality of the lens is like. I'm going to try and put some samples as links in the description below so you can actually look at real world examples rather than what's in a 4K video, which is kind of going to, well, YouTube's algorithm's going to kind of crush the quality there to a certain extent. So you've seen the subject tracking as I move to and fro towards the lens and away from the lens. Next up, I'm going to show you some subject tracking as we move between a couple of objects I've got on my chair here, and you can see again it's tracking pretty well. It's occasionally, I noticed it was losing occasionally. Again, it's not as sharp as the not sharp. It's not as snappy as the Viltrox 23mm lens. So that's something to make note of. But it's still a pretty good lens, and it's still pretty sharp. We'll now go into looking at how sharp the lens is with some sort of various tests. We're going to look at things like, first of all, vignetting, which actually, even wide open vignetting is really good on this lens. So at f1.4, there's a tiny bit noticeable in the corners. Stop down to f2.8, it's pretty much gone. The lens sharpens up. And once you're at f5.6, the lens sharpens up even further, and there's nothing in the corner. So not as bad as the Viltrox 23mm, which had quite significant vignetting, which I quite liked for the style, but nevertheless, it had quite significant vignetting. Again, the lens works extremely well with the focus pull tests. We've done a focus pull test with the speed settings, and again I'll put them in the description below, but we've got the tracking on 2 and the speed on +5 for the fast test. And then we move to doing a more slow focus pull test. We've left the tracking on the same speed, but the speed of the autofocus is set to -5 to show you that you can do some nice slow cinematic focus pulls. So pretty good from that respect. And then the close focusing, as you can see, is not too bad. Now this lens did have some problems up until recently with close focusing, but they've just brought out a new firmware update for all their lenses actually, and I can report back that it's a big improvement. I haven't measured it exactly, but it's definitely closer. It seems to be around about 30 centimeters. I get the feeling that you can get closer, and you can see you've got lovely, quite round bokeh with fairly soft edges. It depends on which way you look at it, but it's got quite pleasing bokeh, this lens, which I like. And obviously you can see when I record the videos, I try and have the lens as wide open as possible so you can see what the bokeh is like. The lens is nice and sharp, but more so as you stop down. When you're wide open, again, you've got a little bit of softness in the corners, I've noticed. Again, it's not as bad as the 23mm Viltrox lens. So it's still quite sharp in the middle at f1.4, f2.8, it's getting really sharp in the middle, and at f5.6, again, that bit sharper again, and of course in the edges. So again, I've got the samples up of the lovely texture on my chair, so you can see just how sharp the lens is getting. At f1.4, of course, your depth of field is millimeters when you're quite close to subjects. But I've linked some. It's got some links to pictures of the only willing subject I had, which was my cat. I will put a few in the video as well, just for quick reference, so that you can see what's going on. So in conclusion, again, it's a really good effort by Viltrox. It's certainly up there with the XC 35mm. In fact, the autofocus on this, especially for video, is a lot better and a lot smoother. The XC, if you watch my video, you'll see that there's kind of a little bit of stepping as it tries to adjust the autofocus. Now that video was recorded on an XT30 prior to the autofocus updates, so it could have been to do with the autofocus as well. I will have to do some subsequent tests, but the XT30 I had was on the latest firmware, and its autofocus is within a hair's breadth of the XT4. So I don't think it was that, but suffice to say, on the tests I've done so far, certainly the autofocus is better on the 33mm Viltrox than the XC 35mm. Sharpness, they're about the same. Because you can't compare them at f1.4, you have to compare at f2.0. And using both of them, they're both equally sharp for stills. The autofocus is equally as confident, snapping onto your subject. Eye autofocus working very, very nicely. As I say, it was difficult using my cat as a subject for the Viltrox, having no humans to take photographs of because of the current pandemic situation means that it's obviously very, very difficult for me to get out and take real-life photographs, so my cat is a substitute. And again, some of the shots I was taking this morning were in deliberately quite low light conditions with shadows, strong shadows, and the lens seemed to cope quite well, locking on quite confidently. So certainly, if you are in the market for a lens and weather resistance as the XF 35mm has isn't important, and you're not too worried about the weight because it's quite a hefty lens, this one, compared to the Fuji equivalents. Both of them it's heavier than. It's very well made. In fact, it's the same build exactly as the 23mm. They're actually the same filter thread size, which I think is 52mm. I think Viltrox have pretty much used the same body shell, for want of a better word. All metal construction, metal lens hood, little bag you get with it, all very good construction. But if you don't mind the lack of weather resistance and you want a bargain, but if you've got an aperture ring, go for the Viltrox. The aperture ring is clickless, as the same as the 23mm. I don't have issue with this. Some people have knocked it. I would say the only time I've knocked it is when I'm getting it out my camera bag and handling it onto the camera. But I should be checking my aperture when I'm mounting the lens anyway. That's the only time I've had issue with it. Other than that, once it's on the camera, I've never really knocked it. But the thing is, the clickable ones are much harder to knock. So if you like to have a clickable aperture ring, you could go again for the XF 35mm f2 or f1.4. The f1.4 is a lot more expensive though. I think it's about £600 or £700. It might be more actually. It's very expensive. So you've got to compare it with the f2, really. Now, if you're on a real budget and you don't mind not having an aperture ring, Still the XC 35mm from Fuji is a very good choice. It's only £160. You could call it the equivalent of the Canon Plastic Fantastic, which is the Nifty, or the Nifty 50, which I used to have. It's cheap build quality, the XF 35mm, but it's optically as good as the XF 35mm is the XC. So, in conclusion, if you have nothing and you can afford about £260, personally, I would recommend you get the Viltrox, because it'll give you the best of all worlds. It's better, you know, if you want an all-round lens, it's good at video and stills, get that. Possibly if you're on a real budget, get the XC. But really, if I had to choose between having the Fuji, if I wanted weather resistance, yeah, I would get that. I would get, you know, simply because of the weather resistance, if I could afford it and had the money. But if weather resistance isn't important to you, you're just doing pieces to camera, like it's mostly what I do for video at the minute, then this is a perfectly good lens that is thoroughly recommended. So there you go, folks. Certainly worth adding to your collection of lenses if you do video and portrait work, and indeed some more zoomed landscapes, and desire some pleasing bokeh with a lovely shallow depth of field of that F1.4, and still with a decent amount of sharpness in the images. So, if you liked what you were watching and you enjoyed the video, please do drop a like. It helps the channel hugely. Please do subscribe for extra videos. I do try and do a video once a week when I can. And share away. Catch you all later, folks. Bye.